Thank you all for joining us today for the third webinar in our series, Life Science Cloud, Achieving the Connected Enterprise to Drive Productivity. Today we'll be discussing the upcoming electronic medical device reporting deadline, which is August 13th of this year. My name is Kim Hutchings, and I'm VP of Alliances with USDM, and I'm very pleased to have one of our key strategic cloud partners, 123 Compliance, with us today. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to introduce our presenters. David Blewett is the VP of our Cloud Compliance practice. He and his team are helping life science companies move from on-premise solutions to the cloud. He is an expert in ensuring compliance with cloud technologies and has over 8 years of cloud compliance experience with an additional 20 in computer system validation. Also with us today is Plurent Umeri. He is the CEO of 123 Compliance. Plurent has also been working with life science organizations for over 14 years. You'll see today with 123 Compliance, Plurent and his company are game changers in developing quality solutions on the Salesforce platform, including complaint management, quality management, learning, and document management. For those of you who aren't familiar with USDM, we work exclusively in the life science and healthcare industries. We are a global leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory solutions to this space. And for the past few years, we've been helping companies move from on-premise solutions to cloud-based technologies with an emphasis on ensuring that FDA and other global regulations, including 21 CFR Part 11, can be met with cloud systems. Today you'll be hearing specifically about our cloud practice, but I do want to highlight our specialized teams in all of those areas where you might need to be thinking about compliance, whether it be clinical, lab, ERP, content management. And we have subject matter experts in important regulations including UDI, serialization, and DSCSA. Quick intro about 123 Compliance. Like USDM, they're also focused on life sciences exclusively. And they're the leading life science partner to Salesforce.com, working with several top 10 pharma and medical device companies right now, replacing legacy on-premise quality management systems within these organizations, providing tremendous cost savings and improving user experiences. Quick notes about our webinar logistics. We try to keep our webinar approximately 30 minutes in duration. We invite you to enter your questions into the chat area over on the left-hand corner of the screen, and we'll be answering those questions at the end of the session. Also, the webinar recording will be available later today on our website, and you can continue the discussions on our social media pages. With that, I will turn it over to David to give an overview of the agenda.
Okay, thanks, Kim. So today we're going to be talking about a number of items, first being the connected quality system and how you can embrace the power of the cloud within that quality system. Talking a little bit about medical device reporting, the history, and then the present and what's coming in the future, coming in August. Some deadlines for the submissions, how to submit those EMDRs, what's required, what options you have. Going to be talking about some of the technical considerations, the gateway-to-gateway integration for the submission of those records, some of the business process considerations, and then a little bit about why it makes sense to move these processes into the cloud. And at the end of the session, we'll also have a quick Q&A if you can post any of the questions like Kim mentioned. So first and foremost, I'll give a quick overview what cloud validation is and how you can embrace it. We need to use the cloud systems and integrate more effectively. And best practice validation methodologies are now being used. A lot of life sciences companies are using the cloud and have realized they can qualify and validate the cloud and cloud platforms to utilize and take advantage of the power for the GXP applications that are available and out there. And that's opening the door to the huge power that using the cloud does give you, whether you're using already for other non-GXP functionality or if you want to open it and embrace it for GXP. There are simple and established methods to do that, following existing methodologies and tweaking them very slightly to take advantage of cloud. So now Plurent is going to talk a little bit more about the connected business and quality system, and I'll talk to you in a little while about the EMDR history and future.
Thanks, David. So the theme of this webinar series is to basically highlight how the business itself is interconnected in their business processes, and then the tools that the business uses would facilitate sort of this interconnectedness. So think about how customer service and complaint handling work. Because, complaint handling is, an extension of customer service. And the businesses themselves are very well interconnected, and then having the tools that have this, facilitate this interconnectedness makes a big difference. Another example would be, think of supplier management or supplier quality and the CAPA system or the audit system, and how they integrate, the businesses integrate, very closely with each other, and then the tool set that these businesses use needs to integrate. So the theme of this webinar series is the connected business quality system, is because the cloud technology nowadays facilitates this interconnectedness so much easier than it used to be before with, the silo systems, the silo quality systems that used to be. With that said, we think that the best practice going forward would be for sort of both internal and external members of these business processes, being patients, providers, manufacturers, regulators, and suppliers, to basically collaborate a lot easier using cloud technology, cloud and mobile technology. The future is now. This has been happening, for a while, and the technology is here now that is able to facilitate all this interconnectedness. And with that, I'll hand it back to David.
Okay, thanks, Torren. So just a quick brief history of the MDR regulations and why we are where we are now. So, in 2007, the Food and Drug Administration Amendment Act required the FDA to collaborate with public and private entities and academic entities to develop methods to give access to these disparate healthcare data sources for analyzing that data that comes from them, and a huge amount of it. And as a result of that, in May the following year, the FDA announced their Sentinel initiative, which was creating an electronic system nationally for monitoring those FDA-regulated product safety data that was coming across. But obviously, it needed more than that. And in September 2012, the FDA finally published a guidance document, a report, post-market surveillance report, to strengthen the national system for medical device post-market surveillance. So that's kind of bring up to 2012, and then following from that, because the FDA receives so much data, several hundred thousands of device medical reports each year, the system's got notable limitations because of that, and that includes the submission of potentially incomplete or inaccurate data, lack of report timeliness, the underreporting of events. There is unsustainable volume coming through right now. So something had to be done. And EMDR has come along. The future is now, or it's going to be very soon. Talk about the deadline in a second. But in February last year, the FDA published their final rule on EMDR, requiring manufacturers and importers into the U.S. to submit MDRs to the FDA in electronic format. And that format has to be in a format that the FDA can process and review and obviously store. Then they give us a number of different methods for submitting those EMDRs. They have their eSubmitter application, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And also the Health Level 7 individual case reports, and then the gateway to gateway, which is a focus today. And if they're user facilities, they can continue to submit paper reports. But in the majority, they're going to be submitting these by electronic methods. So what's the deadline? So in August 13th of this year, the deadline expires, and manufacturers and importers have to, at that point, begin submitting electronically. Now, if you can't meet that deadline for whatever reason, you have to request and obtain an exemption from that MDR deadline and continue to report via hard copy past that date. So there is options, but the FDA is going to review those as they come in. So what are the methods for submitting these electronic medical device records? So the first one is the FDA eSubmitter. It's a downloadable application. It's free to allow submission of MDRs. That's one at a time. So obviously that's only suitable for low volume reports, reporters, putting the data across. That generates that HL7 ICSR message for each record the user generates. So again, it's one at a time generated using that application. And that may be suitable for some businesses. It's obviously not practical for all if you're submitting a lot. The submission of MDRs can come across via HL7 either as a batch or individually as XML files from a complaint handling system. So systems like 123 Compliance can submit those, and Glenn will talk to that in a second. And it does support the exchange of electronic data to enable the extraction of information from the reporter's database into that electronic secure gateway, the ESG. So that submissions gateway is what we're going to focus on in the gateway to gateway integration today. And MDR uses that gateway to receive those electronic records. And Glenn's going to talk about how 123 Compliance does that for you, and you can utilize it in that way.
Thanks, David. So submitting EMDRs to FDA is, it can be a long process. It's the rules are sort of published and are available, and normally it would be a straightforward process. But there is certain things that you have to think about as far as doing gateway-to-gateway integrations or gateway-to-gateway submissions of EMDRs. The important thing to think about is, are you sending attachments? And attachments, do you have to send in, lab data, investigation data, and so on. And then also, do you have the expertise in-house? The attachments are kind of important because you have, it's an extra layer of complexity on top of being able to create the HL7 file. That you need to turn those attachments into base 64 files, and then package them together with your HL7 XML message. Zip them and encrypt them. Apply a digital certificate on that, and then send them to FDA through a special port that is also encrypted, and it requires its own SSL certificate, and so on. So this, and you're using AS2 technology to do all of this integration, all of these submissions. So with that said, these are things that in a daily life of a medical device company, this is technology that people don't work with every day. And the skill set is not there. People need to come up to speed, and and then it requires all the back and forth with FDA support to get to where you need to go. So another technical consideration. So I mentioned the certificate. So you now have two sets of certificates. It's the digital certificate to package your entire submission, the XML and the attachments and so on, and then also you need your certificates that are used from your gateway. So these are these have their own expiration dates. They need to be reviewed. They need to be sent to FDA, and it seems trivial, but it does happen that these things do expire, and then all of a sudden your submissions don't go through. And you have to keep up with the dates, you have to keep up with the renewals, and you have to make sure that you send all those certificates to the FDA so that you don't have extending submissions all of a sudden. So so once this baseline sort of type of functionality for gateway to gateway submissions is put in place, then you have to think about how are you going to do other technical checks that are related to the actual record itself, to the MDR record itself. So there is a record that's got data in it, and this data needs to be put into this XML file and needs to go out. So so this data, I'll cover some of that a little bit in the business considerations, but there is once you make a submission, once you send an MDR, an EMDR over to the FDA, FDA is going to send you acknowledgement that says I received it. Then he will send you 3 acknowledgements. Acknowledgement 1 will say, there's a handshake. Acknowledgement 2 is basically I send it to the CDRH. That's all it says. Essentially, you are I did the handshake. Yes, we connected with your gateway. 2, you told me to send it to the CDRH. Yes, I did send it. And then the 3 one is the important one. That's the one where FDA actually checks all the data you have on your EMDR to make sure it's okay. So are your date formats correct? Are they? Are your do you have the right codes put in? Do you have the correct true and false statements where they need to be? MDR is sort of an electronic version of the MedWatch form, but it takes it a lot further. There is a lot of additional data that goes into it that is not exactly doesn't map one-to-one with the MedWatch form. So that means so the Act 3 is basically the big deal. It tells you that FDA received your EMDR and you're done. Now, I mentioned that there is 3 acknowledgments. Typically the second acknowledgement, there is rarely any issues with that. But what is important is, did I get a handshake with the FDA? Did they actually receive my file? 1, and then 2, did it pass the checks, the XML checks that FDA performs, and which means that I got a positive acknowledgement 3 from FDA. So these don't happen in real time. So for example, a handshake does happen in semi-real time. You press submit from your screen, and then boom, you get acknowledgement 1 within a minute or so. But acknowledgement 2 and 3 don't come in real time. You don't get those, so you need to check. Did I get them? Did I get them? Did I get them? What should I do in the system? Now you have to think about what do you do in your system when you don't get them. So that means you need both sort of event-based checks on the system to say, hey, I received acknowledgement 1. I don't have to worry about it. And then I received a failed acknowledgement 3. I need to send a notification to somebody to check this record, update it, and resubmit it. And then also you need a time-based check to say, did it in 4 hours? Did I get an acknowledgement 3? Acknowledgement 3, usually takes a lot less, 20 minutes or so. Within 20 minutes, you should be getting the acknowledgement 3. But let's say 4 hours, you say, or 6 hours, or 24, depending on what you want to do as a business. You say, did I get acknowledgement 3, and then notify somebody, and then raise it to support and say, this is not happening. What do I need to do to fix it? So yeah, the bottom line is you need both event and time-based checks. So going back to the business rules to map your MDR record to the XML. We find so we work exclusively on Salesforce platform. We find that doing all this mapping on Salesforce platform is a breeze. We don't have to do just anything on sort of the XML creation side. A lot of the logic for creating the mappings, what value goes into each field of your HL7 message, can be just created, is set on the Salesforce side, and then you just push that data into your XML, template, for lack of a better word. And then, so, you have all this sort of higher level configuration type work that you do to link all these values. If this value is null, put NA and I, or pick the right NA and I ASKU from the screen versus the field value, and then also do how do you handle the null date values and null number values and so on. All this stuff is done on the Salesforce side with clicks, with a mouse and a keyboard, and then the rest of it is taken care of. And then what do you do after that? You have to think, what do you do with the XML file created, and what do you do with the acknowledgement? The XML files that come from the FDA that contain the acknowledgement. So we do two things. For one thing, we take the cautious approach. We approach for each submission, we attach the XML that was created, and there. So if you want to view it and take a look at it, it's always attached to the record. But then also the acknowledgement, we sort of parse them, make them in a human readable format, and show them to the business user. If there is a failure, it's going to show you in human readable format. Hey, this is what FDA says fails. This is what you need to change, and then they change the record, and that's submit again, and it's done. But also, we attach the source, the XML file that comes from the FDA to the submission, so that all that record is in the record. All that record is on the MDR record, I should say. So. So then there is business considerations that which I touched upon a little bit earlier, and basically, what do you do for failed submissions? So failed submissions, if your acknowledgement one is missing, it typically means your technical team needs to be involved, and in our case, our technical team gets involved because that means a handshake with FDA is not happening. So something, it could be that the FDA gateway is down. It does happen once in a while, just like every system that is out there in the world. There is some downtime for every system. It does happen with FDA gateway, so that could be a reason, or then other reasons that we have. I mentioned a little bit. Could be your server setup. Could be your certificate expired, and so on. So these are the things to look at. And then you need to look at what happens when the acknowledgement 3 has failed. Acknowledgement 3 has failed. The system will update an MDR that a failed response came from the FDA. A failed acknowledgement came from the FDA, and so now I need to alert. Which people do I need to alert to do this? And do we send this back to the MDR creators or MDR authors versus approvers, or do we send it back to the approvers to make the small changes that are typically needed when an acknowledgement 3 has failed? And then the next one is acknowledgement 3 is missing. So this means this is another time-based check that business needs to be aware of. So if acknowledgement is missing, it's typically another thing where the technical team needs to be involved, and that issue needs to be resolved. So another thing, a big thing to think about is sometimes it does happen that an MDR is not generated from your MDR tracking system or a complaint handling system that has the MDRs in it and so on. Which, by the way, I also want to add to this. I mean, there is complaint handling systems in the market that don't contain MDR and MDR submission, and that's the same way as having your tax software. Just tell you, well, here's your tax statement, and then send it to the IRS, but not actually do the submission and get your refund and all that stuff electronically. That's how it is. Having a complaint handling system that contains both the MDR and do the submission and get the acknowledgement and all that stuff we think should be sort of baseline functionality for any complaint handling system. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is, should you do this on-premise or on the cloud? So, the important part is this something that the company wants to invest in? MDRs are super important, but also are very, it's not like widely used technology in the company. It's niche, and you need specialized personnel that you need to keep them, and so we would recommend, for example, that you have a complaint system that has the technology to do everything from actually taking the complaint and doing the reporting to the FDA, because that will help you a lot. But also just partner with companies that actually do this all the time. I think that takes the complexity out of that work. And EMDR, the ability to send MDRs electronically is great. I just needs to be checked all the time. Needs to be looked at all the time. It's the kind of technology that needs somebody to watch over it the entire time. So with that said, I'll give this back to David. Or
yeah, hi. Thanks, Brent. Moving to the cloud, it makes it easier for you to migrate your configuration and actually configure your tools. It's a faster configuration model. You get implementation time a lot quicker, and it's much easier to move data in and out of platforms. And one of the things that's key to the cloud system qualifications is qualifying that platform, that core base foundation. And once you have that qualified, you can then put on top applications. Wanted to be compliant is a suite of applications on top of it with minimal effort and validation needed. So I think we need to move on to follow up with the questions there. If anyone's posted any questions, we can probably answer those now and talk to those.
Thank you, David. Yes, this is Kim. And yes, if you have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat area in the webinar. Looks like we do have a few of them that we can start with. This is to really all co-presenters. First one is, with e-submissions of data using cloud systems and integrations, do those systems need to be qualified? And if so, how does that process work for these SaaS systems?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely it's using cloud systems. This is a cloud-based model, of course. And qualifying those cloud systems is not unlike regular qualification and validation that you see with hosted systems. But there are, of course, some nuances with it being a software as a service and the constant kind of change and flux that brings along, with the advantages and the perceived disadvantages. But like I say, those differences you really have to establish and select your vendor carefully. Make sure that those vendors do provide that infrastructure, that stable infrastructure, that qualified infrastructure. You're leveraging all of their activities to qualify that piece for you. You don't take ownership of that. They take ownership of that and provide that assurance to you. Your SLA with them will establish the relationship, make sure they have the communications protocols that they need to do. You get notice of changes that are coming out. They're doing the right due diligence on those changes. They have change control. They have risk-based testing on the changes they're sending to you to make sure nothing's adversely affected. And so when you do establish the SLA, that's the very key thing with the vendor. You leverage a portion of what you used to do from a hosted system perspective, and you're leveraging that supplier. So you want to make sure they do have that process well nailed down.
Thank you, David. Next question. I have concerns about the risk of attempted submissions receiving a failed acknowledgement, especially for submissions with a very tight reporting timeline. Can you speak to ways to mitigate this risk?
So I'll take that, Kim. That's a very common concern. Business has to do what they need to do to fill out all the information for the MDR, and they sometimes have to wait for the investigation to complete and so on. So they have to wait until the last moment before they have to send the EMDR through. And then the clock is ticking. I have until midnight to make it. Do I make it? And I think that's a very good question, and I think that has to do with those time-based checks that we talked about. So the time-based checks, we know, sort of the acknowledgement one, the handshake. Is it happening? How fast is it happening? And then, to make sure that, you can actually connect with the FDA on time. And then the second, a big part is basically to have all the checks in your complaint handling system or your EMDR system to make sure the data you're sending to FDA, that the chances of that failing are slim because you have pre-checked, double-checked, or triple-checked electronically this file, and you don't allow the submission of this file until all the checks are passed in the software tool itself, so that the submission is just basically transferring that information to the FDA, and then it will pass the FDA checks. Because the FDA checks are known. You just need to make sure that those are applied, so that's a big part. And then also the time-based checks that we talked about, sort of the MDR clock. The MDR clock says, in 4 hours or 2 hours, I didn't get this, or you can say 15 minutes, I didn't get this. You run the clock for the time-based checks, and also the clock basically of how many days do I have left. You have the clock that says, I have 1 day left. I have 2 days left until 29 days. You just created the MDR, and then you have 30 days to send it. So, and then you can work on basically the most high priority items. You have some buffer on, as a business rule, you have some buffer as to how soon you send those files, and then also the business rules checks that I mentioned, and then the time-based checks that say, if there is a failure, alert this person right away, or if there is, X amount of time passed without having a positive acknowledgement, then let us know, create an alert, and then bring the right people involved.
Great, thank you so much. What are the most time-consuming items in the process of setting up an EMDR?
So I'll take that. So the most there is some time involved in actually setting up quote-unquote contract with the FDA. I'm using that basically, you have to sign up for it, and you have to create the certificates and, send them, and then FDA tells you're ready to start testing. So after this process, there's the testing period that involves basically creating all the business rules for how you create the XML file, the HL7 file, to make sure that you are following the rules that FDA has put in on the XML. And then also this process of back and forth of doing submissions, getting failure, coming back, what the failure is. And sometimes you might not know you cannot tell what the failure is. So you have to you create a ticket to support with the FDA, and they'll come back to you, and then you have to keep making changes until you get a positive acknowledgement from the FDA, and then build on from there. I think that is the biggest process, from having the longest process from having sort of the contract, quote unquote, with the FDA to actually getting the positive acknowledgement.
Thank you so much. Looks like we have one more question. Do you batch submissions or do you send them in real time?
We send them in real time. So the moment somebody clicks submit, then that goes straight to the FDA, and then we get an acknowledgement, and then that specific record is updated and so on. We don't batch them.
Great. Well, that looks like that's all the questions that we have. Feel free if you think of any others or want to continue the conversation, you are welcome to do so on any of our social media sites. And for those of you, again, who have colleagues that weren't able to join us today, the recording of the webinar will be available later today on our website. Last but not least, please join us for our last webinar in this cloud series entitled Integrating Supplier Community into Your Quality Systems in the Cloud, and that will be on June 25th. Thank you all again so much for your attendance, and have a wonderful afternoon.